Messiah as well.
So, Melissa Hazelip. You need to tell us a brief history of how this film came to be.
Well, it's been very long in the making. Okay. We've been working on the film for 10 years. Wow. And we started researching and coming up with the idea in 2008, and then we shot the first interview in 2009. And we began fundraising and writing grants and researching and putting together a board of academic advisors. We have the honorable, honestly, so grateful to have you here. Sonia Sanchez is on and also in the film, of course, and Louis. And it took so long because we really wanted to be very, very thorough, and we wanted to interview as many people as we could, and we wanted to raise money make the film for the people, by the people, so that it has the same pedigree as the original show. So the entire film was funded by grants and nonprofit organizations and donations from wonderful supporters such as yourself. And so we had to take our time with it to give it that honesty and that depth, and the research, and of course the licensing and all of the editing. That took quite a long time too. We're so grateful to finally be here tonight, and thank you, Black Star, for having us.
So I have three brief questions, one for each of you. So Melissa, first question. So documentaries oftentimes make history firm, make history concrete, you sort of concretize history, but we know history is not concretized. We know that there are many forces, that sort of shape a narrative. What were the forces that you had to come to grips with in the editing room in order to put this story together? I mean, because there are many ways that this history could have been interpreted.
Absolutely.
And what was the consensus that you? Yeah.
I agree with you so completely and entirely. We did something very unique, very painstaking, very deliberate, and that is that we almost created three separate films, if you will, three timelines. Those of you filmmakers out there, I know you're out there. Yes! Never give up! So we created three timelines, right? So the first timeline was storyline A. That was the story of Seoul. Not the entire, history, but the story for the 5 years, the 5 seasons from start to the end. And so we put together that whole thing with 3x5 cards and edited an entire sequence just like that. The second storyline was storyline B. That was Ellis Hazelip's story. Now, it's not a cradle-to-grave story. It's kind of uniquely positioned, so we drop in on the 5 seasons of Seoul and how his life aligns with it, but we also need to know who he was before, historically, and who he was after. And then the third storyline is storyline C, which we edited separately as well. And that's the historical zeitgeist, the contextualization of the story. What was happening in America, in the world, not just for African Americans, but for the larger African diaspora, for all of Black people, and what were we pushing up against from 1968 to 1973. But what happened before that led us to that moment, and what happened after, as you saw in the last montage, leading to the present. Then we took all three of those three separate films, and we literally collapsed them. We collapsed the storyline into one film, and we forced ourselves to come to grips with what is the story we're telling? How can we be economic with it in the editing? And how can we line up the most salient moments of all three of those storylines to tell this story? Because it's so complex and it's so rich, and the pressure to get it right is enormous. Historically, emotionally, generationally, not just for us, but the shoulders we stand upon, and the artists who are coming after us, and the new generation, the legacy of soul, which is what the last part of the film is about. So we struggled with that every day for really the better half, almost a year and a half in the editing room.
So can everyone please introduce yourselves? We'll start at the end. Or we'll start here.
Hi, I'm Martina Lee.
And you directed Blueberry.
And I directed Blueberry.
Yes.
My name is Jessica Ashman, and I directed I Don't Protest, I Just Dance in My Shadow.
My name is Mariana Diallo, and I'm the writer and director of Hair Wolf.
I'm Xavier Coleman, I did White Knuckle. Adonis Williams, and I did Civic Mom.
All right, well, let's start off with Civic Mind, which is an interesting look into working within the system and working outside of the system. Can you talk a little bit about the themes that you were exploring in your film?
Sure. So I was exploring community policing, institutionalized racism, gentrification, lack of critical thinking amongst the youth. It's inspired by some real life events. I used to do this program when I was younger, so some of it is, you can say, like autobiography. I got the girl as opposed to yeah, a combination of real life events and some stories I read about and heard of. What inspired me to actually write it was, I'm from Brooklyn, born and raised, and so gentrification has been like right in front of my face. The neighborhood I live in is probably the most gentrified outside of Williamsburg. So I've seen neighbors and friends and family being displaced. So there was one time I was driving in Bushwick, and I passed by this block where this bodega used to be that I had a sting at, and what's there now is this massive condominium. So it kind of hit me, made me feel like I was part of that process. It made me think of that conspiracy that these operations that they're doing, which is targeting neighborhoods that have minorities, are helping gentrification. So, as an artist, I always say when you feel emotional, best thing to do is to create. And I put pen to paper, and we're here now.
Thank you. And one question.
This is such a good question. Wow.
It just seems like it's a crisis in our community.
No,
Yeah,
you hit it right on the. You hit it right on the. I mean, I'm gonna go. Yeah.
I'm sorry. I said I wasn't gonna go Trevor no more.
It's what your best friend does to you. I mean, listen. What Steph does and has always done, and now we have two beautiful children together. Honestly, like, it's all whack to me when I see them anyway. So my accountability, that always puts everything into perspective anyway. Like, yeah, like that makes everything less precious to in terms of like my practice. That makes it kind of like, and that's like more and more apparent like over the last 5 years since the birth of like my oldest, Olukai, like it just doesn't feel the same anymore, which is a whole other conversation about what the hell I'm gonna do next. But it doesn't. That's the first point of accountability is to not have any conversation about it at all, because it's not that important, really. Like that, for me, is we all need to get to that point first, because what's important, and I don't mean as an artist, as a practitioner, yes, your practice is important, but the things we aspire for, in particular in the film context, the things we want from people that do not like us, have no love for us on every level, which is what this whole idea of accountability, this whole idea of what is good and what isn't good, like our whole measurement of that. And I've had to grow into this, you know what I mean? This is new for me, that our whole measurement of that doesn't mean anything anyway when you come home to family and you see your partner that's been through all of your bullshit with you and your kids that are like, where's Baba? And you know, you out trying to win an Academy Award or whatever the nonsense is you're in the process of doing when you're making films, which hasn't been able to shake all those shackles, right? So that's the first step. The second one is, it's the most important question. Actually, it's really the only important question to me now is, there were many films. Well, there are two things. I'm just gonna say it. You know, there are two things that I feel like. There are two films that I feel like I wish we would have had a more collective conversation around why they worked and why they didn't work. Okay, so excuse me, I was like a little lengthy, but like. Beast of the Southern Wild came out, and I remember feeling like, what is everybody talking about? And if this doesn't work for us, or it works for us, like, okay, if it works for you, let's really unpack it. Let's talk about why it's problematic on many levels, and why people connected to it emotionally, and why things felt a particular way. I didn't feel that way, but I didn't feel like there was real conversation happening around it because somebody else controlled it.
You shout now? I'm gonna go ahead and do that. My girl Lana is here. She did makeup and costume. And some of y'all might not know Yabo Kwayana, but she won something last year. Best short, I think. She's the bomb. She's my DP. Friends for 20 years. My partner, it's awesome. He always jumps in when I ask him to. Anyway, who curated this block? Y'all did that.
Peace. Hi. Sorry for being here. My question is for the entire panel. I feel personally that art gives you an opportunity for a lot of introspection. And when you're creating films and this type of art, I just wonder, how do you self-care through the process of either the ideation or the actual filming, or like the millions of hours of editing, or this, just the different stressors that come along with taking a project from an idea to actually perhaps this moment or something more. And just personally, if you feel like answering, how do you kind of self-care through the process of filmmaking? Thank you.
Okay, I'll start. Well, my first act of self-care was not having her be shot and killed in the street, which is what happens before the film opens. That she's killed by a coward. And it was hard because I'm like, I want the audience to be with me, but y'all are we're here. We're all traumatized. And so my first act of self-care in this film was that I did not shoot the scene I saw in my head of her being killed, just that we pick up the moment after her death. It was a hard decision because people don't know. I teach high school students and they're like, it's pretty to say the same, but like, what happened, And they're like, well, why didn't you put the shooting in the police? And I just was like, I can't see another, I can't do that. For me, it's necessary. But in that moment, the PTSD was like, you can't like stage that whole thing and hear that and design that sound and all that. So that was kind of my first act. And I was like, it is what it is, if you don't know that piece of information, it's okay, because you see it everywhere. This is just an after death moment, and I'm hoping that we are received, you know what I'm saying, and healed and bandaged and given the choice to either rest or take up your crown and fight. Help us from the other side, So I think this film actually was an act of self-care because I didn't know what to do with all the emotions I was feeling about Black women dying, Black men dying, children dying in the streets and laying there, being a spectacle. So this is my refuge. This was my self-care. it's hard for me to talk about sometimes because this piece was really personal, even though I'm not from Merchants Village. And so for me, making this piece, I really had to sit with the beauty of community that has kept me alive, and sit with the, just, you know, it really brought up a lot of stuff for me and my childhood, displacement within my own family, within my aunt being displaced from housing, myself, thinking about food insecurity, but also thinking about all of the ways in which my family was saved by, for us it was the church. And so for me, just making this was just a way of honoring my own history.
Yeah, it's a hard question. For me, self-care, the self-care was making the film, for sure. It's definitely based on something that actually happened and has happened throughout my life as a woman, and just sort of kind of reckoning with a certain, like daily you have to think of, the strategies of escape, and very near threats to our existence, and being possible victims of sexualized violence, constantly. And, I think it's very easy to, not easy, but in cinema, I feel like often it's represented when it's super visible and super brutal on our bodies. But there is the cost and the psychic trauma that happens with just the threat constantly. And for me, what happened was that this guy followed me for 2 hours, and I did all these twists and turns and just went. And this is not the first person it happened to, but it was sort of unrelenting, to the point where I had to turn around in front of him and trick him to go into the store, and then run away, and then hide, and then watch him look for me. And I was just this is so normalized, it's just, and nobody cares. And for me, it was just I need to make something that, complicates things. And I didn't, of course, kill him or anything, but there was that feeling. And, and thinking also about when women do defend themselves, and just sort of even just thinking about Nia Wilson and how I would read newspapers and the way they would talk about her, and any sort of threat she might have presented. It just is it is ludicrous in terms of how much onus on women is shifted for us to be these perfect victims in order to get any kind of empathy or sympathy. And for me, the film is sort of about I don't care if I thought about killing him. Maybe that was what I needed to envision. So yeah, that's self-care, and I think sometimes self-care looks very complicated.
Something about improvisation, hanging out with the footage for long amounts of time, allowing different inspirations and mediums to talk to each other, and connecting with family.
Yeah, same here. Our creative practice and process involves our family, whether it's within our internal unit or our soul family internationally, and there's so much of what we've done. The film was 4 minutes, but we spent so much time with it, and our family spent so much time with it. And the self-care in that is about how we can be conscious and intentional about creating art as a means to expand and deepen our relationships with each other.
I think for me, again, Donald created the concept, and I know for him it was important to juxtapose the suffocation he feels in the city to the freedom he feels when he's out in nature, and specifically at the beach. And so I know making this film was self-care for him, and for me, throughout the process of bringing the film home, my self-care was to just sit in nature and to let the film breathe. So when I do come back to the edit, I really do know how to make it sing, because the feeling I get when I am free and in nature is close to the surface for me.
A place of being young and coming up in your filmmaking and in your career, and shout out to Free Spirit. I run a youth program for Black Star, so you're talking about having these kind of roots in being mentored and being helped to get to where you are. I think that that's really interesting, and I'm going to only ask two, but I'm going to ask three. The first one I wanted to ask has to do with, given your age, what was really interesting is that all of them seem to have this arresting ending. Like they all seem to leave you holding a lot, And I'm wondering, where the choice for how you bookended your films came from, and what was it that led you to leave us to hold this? And did that have anything to do with your process, and that you all speaking from, what influenced you, and how did that help you decide what you wanted us to be, to sit with as we left?
Alright, I'll start. Well, I guess I wanted the audience to feel like my actor Aurora was sitting over there somewhere trying to hide, but she's over there somewhere. I wanted the audience to feel like Mira did, which was like, he left. Like at the end of the day, like no matter what he did or like in his actions, even though he felt like he was justified, in the longer scheme of things, like he just left there. Because he overreacted in a situation where if he had just taken the time to think or walk away, instead of trying to push back, he'd have still had a sister. So like in his mind, he was thinking, I'm actually helping her, but in reality, it was just like his own like issues that he was dealing with, and that's why he did what he did. So I wanted the audience to really like sit with that and like, yeah, he was like a great big brother to her, but he never, like he's focused so much on her, he never dealt with his own issues with it. He became a stepfather and like stuff like that. So I want the audience to feel that, like, yeah, he tried his best, but he could have done better. If he actually like taken the time to deal with his issues, he probably still could have been in her life. So that's why.
I think for me, I tend to enjoy, obviously there are exceptions to every rule, but I tend to enjoy short films that are kind of slices that have a phantom beginning and a phantom ending or after. And so I think with my film, I ended up kind of ending it where it did, because I hope it kind of makes the audience wonder, what is she going to do for the rest of this trip, and what happens after she goes back home? And I think that's the same question that the protagonist would ask themselves. And so I kind of wanted to unite the audience and the protagonist with that question in that way.
So with my film, what y'all saw on screen was not like what we wrote. Basically, me and my editor got in there and was like, remix. And so luckily I had his expertise, because he works on things like Greenleaf, The Quad. He was gifted to me by Ava, because I had some issues with like my first editor. And she was like, you need to be like sitting in there. And at this time I was out in LA with her doing Wrinkle in Time. And so I did my cut with Sean, and I gave, Ava was like, give it to me and I'm gonna give you some notes on it. So I gave it to her, and it was about the same length. So I gave it to her, and she gave me some notes. And then I went back and I did my second cut. Me and Sean did a little bit more remixing. And after I gave it to her the last time, she was like, so how did you take my notes? This is before she watched it. And I was like, honestly, this is going back to your mentorship question a little bit. I was like, honestly, I took some of what you said, like all the way. I took some of it, I met you in the middle on some stuff, and some of your advice I didn't take at all. And she was like, good, that's what you're supposed to do, it's your film. And so that was kind of my process with that. It was just, I'm really big on not marrying things, especially like, just in the film world, like stuff can go wrong, Murphy's Law, like everything. So, but the order of how we wound up laying out last looks and posts was totally different than what was on the page. And it was originally titled Lipstick, because we had lipstick as a device. And that is kind of what took us into the flashback. But we lost that when we started remixing. And then Abel was like, well, let's work on this name song. And I was like, well, the other thing I liked was Last Looks. And she was like, that's it right there. Like, it's pertinent to like what you do on set, calling Last Looks for film.
and leave with that final image of like what she saw of him, what her last look of him was. And I was like, you a genius, fool. That was like some of her advice and stuff I took, but yeah, some of it I didn't, but that's all.
Yourselves and which film you worked on and your role.
My name is Xander Shea Brown. I wrote and directed Bloodrun's Down.
My name is Randall Dotton. I wrote and directed Fever.
My name is Disha Deshawn. I directed Sheen.
My name is Tina Wong, and I wrote and produced Sheen.
So I'm just going to ask a couple of questions to get the conversation going and open it up to the audience. Going on over here. So I guess, I'll begin with one of the obvious through lines that seem to permeate throughout all the films, and that's the idea of grief and loss and the tension between the living and what we do with the memory and those that we really deeply care about. So I wonder if each of you can speak to, this idea of loss and grief, and particularly where the inspiration, whether it was personal or otherwise, that came from for you to make this work.
Bloodrun's Down was very much a personal story. It's based off of my own experience going through adolescence, living with a mother who was mentally ill, suffered a mental breakdown. That was very spiritual in a way, related to hearing or seeing spirits, and there was a lot of ambiguity there as to whether or not I should trust the things that she was feeling. There were things that I couldn't prove. So after a while, there was like a 5-year period of time where we didn't speak to each other because she kind of closed herself off. And so in that time, I wrote several iterations of this story, and I turned it to Bloodrun's Down. But it was basically me trying to figure out, our family's curses and things that were passed down, looking at my mom's experience and my grandmother's experience, and seeing certain things play out over and over again, and how I can kind of break that curse for myself. First, I want to say thank you guys so much. Everybody's work was so beautiful and makes you feel less alone in dealing with these very human experiences. Mine's based on a personal experience as well. I lost my mother in 2014, and I was her caregiver, and I had been told my whole life that there are stages of grief. When you're out in the world, you hear about 5 stages of grief, and my experience wasn't that at all, and I was really taken aback by how angry I was, and when you lose someone, it's weird to sort of wrestle with that anger. And in my family, my culture, I wasn't raised to sort of embrace those feelings. So this was a way for me to express it and try to heal in some way. And luckily I had somebody as sensitive and intelligent as Disha help me express that. So that was the experience and the inspiration behind it.
For me as a director reading Tina's writing, it was so evident of how universal it was. I mean, I understood immediately that, the end line that the therapist says, she says, grief is long. And I knew that that's the journey we were taking the entire time. And the magic of it, like the spirit kind of coming back, I always believed it, which is really interesting because, a lot of times people are like, well, how will you create? Like, as I'm reading it and talking to our other producer, Carla Moses, who's also acting in the film, Carla and I would have these little private conversations like, yeah, it's totally happening. Like, Mom is totally moving the cups. In fact, when we were shooting that scene, we had a little incident happen.
Oh, yeah.
With the cups or something.
Yeah.
She was in the room, I think.
She definitely was. The morning of the shoot, we had a 4 a.m. call time. I got up at 3, and the lights in my house were turning on and off by themselves. And the faucet on set in the kitchen was turning on and off by itself. Wow. Yes. Thanks, Mom.
But the crazy thing is, it didn't scare me at all. I was like, yes. I know. And Carl and I were looking at each other, and we were like, yeah, we know.
Wow. I was a bit scared. Can we take the top off?
film Fiva, it's interesting. You know, like all of my films, I made about 4 films, and a lot of them are about my relationship with my mom, who also struggles with mental illness, and you know, didn't raise me. I was raised by my grandmother, like a lot of black children are, and so on one hand it was about kind of exploring our relationship, the movie, and on the other hand it was about relationships that we have where we think that we get to a place where we finally met the one. We finally met the person, we finally meet the person that we're going to spend the rest of our life with. At least in our mind, we think that that's going to happen. And then when it doesn't happen, the question is kind of, okay, so what do I do? What do I do? Just day after day, the relationship is not here, and I'm waking up every morning with that person, on my mind, in my heart, and stuff like that. And so after a number of failed relationships, I decided, let me write something about this. And Fiva was the result. It's really a combination of those two things.
Yeah, I think it's interesting that, filmmaking becomes a place where we can work out these psychological issues that we're dealing with, and the idea of, Terrence was speaking earlier at the panel about, we're our first audience, and what does that mean and how do we